Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective, the Rapture, and studying Matthew 24 and the book of Revelation side by side. Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Well, this is part 36, video 36 of our in-depth study, our deep dive into eschatology, the study of end times, with a focus on the rapture. Now, this started off with me doing reaction videos to various positions, and I will continue to do that. And then I said, well, you know what? Rather than to only do reaction videos, because the thing with reaction videos, how I was doing them, you kind of get locked in on certain thoughts. So I said, well, let's just do it. Let's just kind of do an in-depth study all by itself, dedicated to the subject of eschatology with the view of the rapture. And I believe the first titles were biblical proofs for the rapture. So, so that's what we're doing. We're studying eschatology, and we are looking at the scriptures themselves. One of the, I believe, mistakes that people make when forming any theology, holding any view, is you have a you are focused on certain verses while disregarding others. So we're looking at as many of the verses as we possibly can. We're not approaching this with a presupposition here. We even though my belief as far as the rapture is concerned, the rapture of the church, I have a firm belief. The rapture itself, the word means to be caught away. So the biblical use that Paul used, caught up. And I say that because some people take issue with the term or the word rapture. So when we talk about the study of end times, and so the rapture, end times, all of this fits in the prophecies, which is extremely exhausted, okay? In other words, it's simple to understand, but there's a lot of scriptures that you should be aware of, that you should read and know. And to me, especially if you're going to hold a particular view or not. In my opinion, I believe that's where people lack. They latch on to a certain view, whether it's pre-tribulation rapture, mid-tribulation rapture, or post-tribulation rapture. They study just those points of view. Now, those are the three most commonly held views of the rapture. And as I said, the point of the rapture is not so much as people, I think most people would acknowledge the rapture. The biggest debate is when the rapture is going to happen. So as I said, pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, and the post-tribulation. I hold to the view that the rapture will take place before the tribulation period begins. There are those who hold to the view that the rapture will take place in the middle or during the middle of the tribulation period. And then there are those who hold to the position that the rapture will take place at the end of the tribulation period. And I say this in every video, none of the views have a concrete verse, a plain, simple stated verse when the rapture is going to happen. Unlike the second coming of Jesus, excuse me, that is clearly spelled out. In other words, it tells us that Jesus is coming with the clouds. Every eye will see him. His feet will touch down in the on the Mount of Olives, and we know what's going to happen from that point on. Clearly stated. We're going to get into some of those verses today, but clearly stated. And although the Bible clearly states that the rapture is going to happen, it just doesn't state when. So as I exhort people, we can debate in love in Christ. And at the end of the day, agree to disagree. And I say that because there are people that get quite belligerent over the view that they can't prove. You know, they call us deceivers for holding the view that we have. False teachers, not even saved. So it gets very, very bizarre. And in fact, I had one guy, if you go back on some of the videos, he stopped commenting now, but he got very belligerent. And again, so that they get belligerent to the point of name calling, and that's when I kind of check out. You don't have to name call. Let's state your case. I'll state my case. Like I said, at the end of the day, we could just simply say, okay, we agree to disagree. But that's why I'm doing these videos, is because in a sense, this is me making my case for the pre-tribulation rapture view. In order to do that, I think we need to understand all of the moving parts, what is going on. So in the last video, and as I said, we're studying the book of Revelations side by side. And this is why when we look at the prophetic timeline, we have to kind of understand, again, what's going on here. This vision, this prophecy is found in Daniel chapter 2. And you see that it's given a prophetic timeline from Nebuchadnezzar days to the end of time, with Jesus setting up his kingdom. In fact, you see the 4 different world dominating kingdoms. That is so we know what's going to happen until the end of the time. And not only do we know this, but we also know how to chart where we could locate ourselves. So for example, us living today, where do we fit in this prophetic picture? Now, the book of Daniel, from the chapters 7 to the end of the book, from chapters 7 to 12, is basically various interpretation of this vision right here, of this prophetic picture. So again, you have very, very explicit definition of terms. Now, if you're not studying this, then how can you arrive at, to me, a point? How can you arrive at a solid position? This is one of the moving parts that you have to understand in order to understand eschatology. So that, remember, Daniel himself was reading the words, the prophecies of Jeremiah when he received the prophecy of the 70 weeks. So all of that's important. I'm going to jump into some of the verses today, but this is why we're very detailed here. I'll challenge people who want to challenge my position, because rarely do I see people taking the verses that I cite and then telling me where I'm wrong at. They usually just give whatever verses they want. It's like, yeah, you're talking now, here are the verses. And most of them we have dealt with. But anyway, I want to go to the scriptures here. But again, to understand this prophetic timeline, in Daniel 70 weeks, so he received this prophecy, the 70-week prophecy, doing the chest and arms of silver. Now he was, when he was deported, I believe it's the first year that he was deported, this is when Nebuchadnezzar received the prophecy of the head of gold, so the kingdom of Babylon. God said that these 4 kingdoms would rule the earth. Okay, so the next kingdom was the Medes, the Persians. It was during this kingdom that Daniel received the 70-week prophecy, which was a prophetic timeline that once King Cyrus of the Medes and Persian, chest, arms, and silver here, once he received that prophecy, that started a prophetic timeline to the very end of the age when Jesus would come. Okay? So he said, from the issuing of the 4th, the 70 weeks. The 70 weeks were 7 sets of 7-year periods of time. So the next kingdom was the belly of thighs and bronze. In other words, this is what Nebuchadnezzar saw, which was the kingdom, the Grecian kingdom ruled by Alexander the Great. Then you have the legs of iron, which was the Roman kingdom. Now the prophecy, the 70-week prophecy, which brings us to the end of the age. I'll get to that in a moment. Through the end of the age. But 69 weeks, this brought us to the Messiah. Daniel said that brought us to the Messiah, and then him being cut off. So that was the Roman right there. So you can say, here's where we are from the Roman. Now, here's the interesting thing. During the kingdom that has yet to arise, the one of feet of iron and clay. Okay, now some people are calling this a restored Roman Empire. My guess is the reason why they're calling that is because of the legs, the iron that's in both, present in both. But the scriptures doesn't necessarily point that out. Now, what is interesting is that if you go back to Daniel chapter 2, Daniel interprets this dream, and then he said, in the days of this kingdom, the feet of iron and clay, in the days of this kingdom, then you would have Jesus setting up an earthly kingdom. In fact, the rock that you see there, that's not made with hands, it is what was presented in the vision, the dream destroys the human figure there, which represents mankind. Okay, so that's what's going on. It represents mankind. Okay, now prophetically, the 70th week hasn't begun yet. All right, so let me bring up the scriptures. Let's go to the scriptures here. I want to read that before I get back to Matthew chapter 24. So let's look at Daniel. I'm going to look at Daniel chapter 9 because I want to see this. Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9. Here it is right here. When he says 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, to bring a rebellion to the end, put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the prophecy, and the anoint the most holy place. So this is about Israel. Okay, so the 70 weeks are about Israel. Now the reason why that's important, and I say this too, when we read Matthew 24, when we read Revelation, which we're going to get into, understand when we put together these prophecies, notice what he said, very detailed, that what he's talking about here is Israel. In other words, this is not talking about the church. And that's my point. It's not talking about the church. So 70 weeks are decreed about your people, your holy city, to bring about rebellion to an end, to put a stop to iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and then north, to anoint the most holy place. Then he said, verse 25, no one understands this from the issue of the decree. Now remember, 70 weeks was 70 sets of 4-year period. Now, in the last video, I did show you why, either the last video or the video before I showed you how we came up with the 70 weeks equaling 490 years, or 70 sets of 7-year period of time. So how the days are calculated and used. So 7 weeks, 7 days represent a year's period of time. Okay. So then he said, verse 25, no one understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Right? So this happened in Ezra chapter 1, when King Cyrus, the end of the 70-year exile, King Cyrus issued a decree, all you Jews, go back. God has let me know, go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So you read that in Ezra chapter 1. So Ezra and Nehemiah, they're going back to restore. So this prophecy of when that happened also started the prophetic time clock that we saw that brings us to 69 weeks. So he says understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. So understand, that's what he's talking about right here. Until Messiah the Prince would be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks it would be rebuilt with the plaza and the moat, but in difficult times. After those 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. Okay, so after those 62 weeks, the Messiah will have nothing. Okay, so right here, from the 69-week standpoint, if we read Matthew, we now know that we are right between week 69 and then week 70. Okay, so then, and at this point, then we see another shift jump. He says, then the people of the coming prince. I often say that I believe this is where verse 27 should have begun. They should have just added more verses. Remember, the verse headings are not inspired. But anyway, the people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And I said that some people see this as Titus in AD 70. I don't believe it is. I don't believe Titus fulfilled that. I believe at best you can have what is called a near fulfillment and an ultimate or far fulfillment. So the people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end will come with the flood. Until the end there will be war, desolations are decreed. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. So now, so this 1 week or this 7-year period of time. So this is why we see people using the phrase 7-year tribulation period. Okay, so notice he says he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. And then he says, but in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and offerings. And then he said, and the abomination of desolation will be on the wing of the temple. Okay, until the decree destruction is poured out on the desolator. And we'll see all that. The desolator, this coming prince, we'll see him in the book of Revelations. Now I want to read chapter 12. Like I say, just there's a lot in this that we're not studying, but we will kind of come back to at another time. I want to skip down. Look at verse 1, chapter 12, verse 1 says, at that time, Michael the great prince, who stands for watch over who? Your people will rise up, and there will be time of distress. Notice this, there will be time of distress, such as never had occurred since nations come into being until that time. But at that time, your people who are found written in the book will escape. And I'm going to skip down because I want to read the last kind of statement here. Look at verse 11. He says, from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation set up, there will be 1290 days. The one who waits and reaches 35 days is blessed. Now, that the 45-day different, not clear exactly why. It's still about a 3.5-year period of time. So that's, again, keep that in mind right there. So keep those thoughts, right? So now let's go to Matthew. This is kind of where we left off. And I said, starting with verse 14, I'm just going to pick it up there because we've already covered this. And then in the last video, we talked about where the church fits in. So we talked about the mystery that was hid, that was not revealed to other generations. So when Jesus is speaking here, he is not talking about that revelation of the church, the sons of God, the holy sanctuary that God is building for himself to inhabit. That mystery was not revealed in times past. That's important, okay? So he says, verse 14, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Well, so when he says the end will come, what is the end he's referring to? So, and at this point, he then jumps, he shifts thought. So from verse 14 to verse 15, we see another shift in thought. Now watch this in verse 15, he says, so when you see the abomination that called this desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Stop. Now, this is where we're going to pick up at right here. So all of the stuff that I wanted to go over, and I went over in great detail and went over it several times so that we can kind of keep continuity. So Jesus, from verses, you can say 3 on to verse 14, talks about what the disciples would be going through. He doesn't talk about the mystery. We talked about the mystery that Paul talked about, God's building. So when they said the witness of them, the witness, and also Revelations chapters 3 and 4. So we're going to get back to Revelations. I want to get this set here because there's a couple of things, again, we need to understand, especially when we get into Revelations. You really shouldn't, in order to fully understand the book of Revelations, you need to understand the Old Testament prophecies. So when Jesus says here, when you see the abomination that caused desolation, where we already just read that in Daniel. And then he says, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And what is going on? Standing in the holy place. Okay? So he said, now, so who is he referring to when you see this? Remember, he's talking about Jerusalem, the people of Jerusalem, the saints of Jerusalem, those who he's referring to. He is not here talking about the church. So at some point, we're going to come back to again trying to merge it to say, well, why isn't the church here? Because remember, here's my argument, that the church has to be raptured before the tribulation begins, because right now, he's not talking about the church here. So when you go back to verse 14, this good news of the kingdom, right? Even if you go back to verse 9, they will hand you over for persecution. They will kill you. You will be hated by all nations because of my name. Now, Christians have been enduring this. Christians are enduring this as we speak. Now, we're blessed to live in a nation where our Constitution protects us. I can even sue somebody for slandering me. Okay? But there are nations where, even as we speak today, there are nations where Christian brothers are suffering persecution. Then many will take offense, betray one another, hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and deceive many, because lawlessness will multiply. The love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be delivered. Now, again, Old King James says saved. The word saved means delivered. Okay? And then he says it's good news of the kingdom. So this is the purpose of why the persecution. By the way, this is why we suffer. We suffer so to be a witness for the kingdom. That's why we suffer. Okay, that's why we don't take up arms. And as Christians, we always got to be conscious of that. Whatever battle, whatever fight we're in, even here in America. If I'm protesting, whatever it is that I'm doing, understand that we should always have in mind, am I compromising the witness? He says, but the one who endures to the end will be delivered. This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and the end will come. So what is going on when the good news is being proclaimed? We can also ask another question. Has this end come? I'll say no. But you remember in Acts chapter 1, verse 7, when they asked the Lord, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? Let you look at this. Acts chapter 1. I do realize I am going slow because, again, some of these things are so entrenched in our minds, it is hard for us to kind of overcome it, but that's okay. All right. So verse 6, now this is the scene here. Jesus is just moments away from ascending up into the heavens. So this is kind of his last words to the disciples. He says, so when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? Now keep that in mind when we go back to Matthew 24. Because the answer is going to be no. Here's what you need to know about Matt. Here's what you need to know about the kingdom. But we'll get that in a moment. But they're asking, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? And it's a valid question, but notice Jesus' answer. He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his own authority. In other words, not for you to know that. Don't worry about that. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria to the end of the earth. So that's what you're doing. Now, we went over that, even though I'm tempted to go back over, but we kind of covered this again. So as far as this is his instructions, you go out into the world. Now, when we study Revelations chapter 3, the message to the 12 churches, that's the last message we have, prophetically, because the 70th week hasn't started yet. But we studied the 7. By the way, the whole book of Revelation is written to those 7 churches. Okay, it's written to John to give to those churches. Okay, the 7 churches were, again, this is what Jesus' message was to the church. He mentions church in chapters 2 and 3, and then after 2 and 3, doesn't mention church to the end of the letter during the period of time, which we will get to. He doesn't mention the church. But his last word to the churches, there were 7 different kinds of churches, and some of his message was rebuke, some of his book was comfort, and then some praise. And I believe that those 7 kinds of churches, different kinds of churches, represent 7 different kinds of churches today as we speak. That today you could say that they all exist. To this day, they all exist. 7 different kinds of churches. Okay? Now, so now he shifts, right? Because we have to remember what he is asking them. We have to remember in verse 1, as Jesus left, going out of the temple complex, his disciples came and called his attention to the temple buildings. Then he replied to them, don't you see all these things? I assure you, not one stone would be left here upon another that would not be thrown down. While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples approached him privately and said, tell us, when will these things happen? Right? So the thing that he's referring to is the destruction of the temple. And what is the sign of your coming in the end of the age? So that's what he's answering. So he tells them this, and then when we get to verse 15, he says, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation. So now, when they ask him, are you restoring the kingdom? This is after these events here, right? After he's getting ready to send, are you going to restore the kingdom? It's kind of amazing, too. They hear this, and it still doesn't kind of sink in. But he says, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. right? So right here, we just read that in Daniel. So this is now the 70th week. Okay, the 70th week of Daniel. So what is going on in the 70th week of Daniel? Well, one, he makes a covenant for a week, and then in the middle of the week he breaks the covenant. He takes away the sacrifice. Okay, takes away the daily sacrifice. Now I'm gonna reserve this. I'm just gonna mention this now, but this abomination that calls this desolation, standing in the holy place, is talking about, a lot of people know him as the Antichrist. He's really not labeled as the Antichrist. He is labeled as the man of sin, son of perdition, or the beast. And one of the things we see, and we'll get there because we're going to, as we go through the book of Revelation, we're going to come to him. You're going to see this man is he is going to be so arrogant. Okay, he's going to demand to be worshipped as God. He's going to go into the temple of God and demand to be worshipped as God. Okay, I'll give you a little taste of this. Let me go to 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians. Chapter 2. So verse 1 says, "Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to be easily upset in mind or troubled either by spirit or by message or by a letter asked from us, alleging that the day of the Lord has come." Now keep that phrase in mind because we're getting ready to go into it. "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day, the day of the Lord, will not come unless the apostasy come first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in God's sanctuary, publicizing that he himself is God. And do you not remember when I was still with you, when I told you about this? And now you know what currently restrains him, so that he will be revealed in his time." Now he's talking about the man of lawlessness, not Jesus. "For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but the one now restraining will do so until he is out of the way, and then the lawless one will be revealed, and then the Lord Jesus will destroy him with the breath of his mouth and bring him to nothing with the brightness of his coming." The coming of the lawless one is based on Satan's working with all kinds of false miracles, signs, and wonders, and with every unrighteous deception among those that are perishing. Now, let me go back for a moment. I want you to look. He says, the day of the Lord. Oh, verse 4, he opposes himself, and he opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship. Now, so when Jesus says right here, when you see the abomination that called this desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and notice, standing in the holy place, this is what's going to happen. He's going to he's going to make a covenant for 1 week and then break the covenant. And notice, he's going to go into the temple and defile the temple. Okay? Now, again, some people see this as the General Titus in AD 70, when he leveled the temple, destroyed Jerusalem. And here's my understanding of that event. The General Titus, who later became emperor, but at the time of 87, he was the general, that he did not enter the temple like this. And that scene didn't play out in AD 70. And as I said, details is important. So while you might say it is a near fulfillment, Because sometimes with prophecy, you can have a near fulfillment, but then you have an ultimate or far fulfillment. Quick example, when Jesus went into the temple in Luke chapter 4, I believe it is, and the minister handed him the scroll of Isaiah, he found a place where it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, proclaim liberty, open the eyes of the blind, proclaim liberty to the captives." And then he says something about the salvation. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he stops there because the very next sentence says, "and the day of God's vengeance." He doesn't read that. Why? Because what Jesus would the scripture that Jesus applied to himself was a near fulfillment, but the ultimate fulfillment is going to be in these times right here. So watch what he says, right? So when you see the abomination that caused desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Now, this is why we know that the church is not in this scene, okay? See, I believe the church is removed between chapters 14, verses 14 and 15. And if you go back, we're going to come back to, in terms of this, probably kind of focusing on the rapture. We have before, but again, I don't believe he's going to be present here. And of course, this is what the whole debate is about. When does the rapture take place? So he says, verse 16, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. So is he talking to us, the church? What about those who live in Utah? What about those who live in Chile? See, my point is he's not talking about the church. He then shift thought back to this 70th week of Daniel, and he says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on his housetop must not come down to get his things out of his house. And a man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Why would Christians have to worry about the Sabbath? Verse 21, for at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now, and will never again, and will never, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now, and never will again, unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days will be limited because of the elect. Now, some people say, well, see, he said elect, that's talking about the Christians. Well, the word elect is used of just God's chosen. So Israel is referred to as elect. Christians are referred to as elect. But in this context, he's talking about the nation of Israel here. Now, what I want to talk about is, I want to go back, look at this phrase here in verse 2, alleging that the day of the Lord has come. Because it's important to understand what he is describing here is the day of the Lord, this great tribulation, okay? So I want to look at a couple of verses that describes the day of the Lord. Now, I'm also doing this with the kind of aim at showing why this is not referring to the church, that this particular period of time, the day of the Lord. Okay. So let's look at a couple of verses here. Um, let's look at Isaiah. Let's look at Joel. By the way, Look at remember the question that Peter asked, the disciples asked Jesus, "Are you restoring Jerusalem at this time?" And I said it's a valid question. So look at this. This is Joel chapter 3. And he says, "Yes, in those days," and Jesus' reply, of course, is, "This is not these days." But notice, yes, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and take them to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there because of my people, my inheritance Israel. The nations have scattered the Israelites in foreign countries and divided up my land. Okay. Um, let's see. So that's why, yeah, they had a valid question, right? About Israel. Now, by the way, and this is throughout the Old Testament, the writings of the prophets, is throughout God's promise about restoring Israel. So they did have a valid question, and plus the Messiah was there. So why not put two and two together? The Messiah is here. We have the prophecies about um, um, restoring Israel, and I also say this: there will be no question when God wants to disperse Israel. There will be no um, question about that. God is the one that's going to restore the land to the people of Israel. What's going on over there now? That's just it's not a fulfillment, by the way, of prophecy. But look at verse 9, and he says right here. Where am I? Let's see. Where did I miss it here? All right. Oh, here we go. Verse 14. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon will grow dark, and the stars will cease their shining, and the Lord will war from Zion and raise his voice from Jerusalem. Heaven and earth will shake, but the Lord will be a refuge for his people, a stronghold for the Israelites. Okay. Um, let's see here. Let's go to, where do I want to go? Um, hmm. Let's look at Jeremiah. Do I want to see? Oh, well, I hit Isaiah. So let's go into Isaiah here. Seems like I want to go someplace else in Isaiah. Isaiah, I guess chapter 3. Seems like it's something else I want. That's not what I was looking for. That's the millennial reign, which I'm going to get to later. Uh, Let me look at Jeremiah, see if I can find it there. I'm looking at verses specifically for the day of the Lord. What is being described in the day of the Lord? No, no. Um, let's see here. Jeremiah. Look at Jeremiah 46, verse 10 says, "The day belongs to the Lord, the God of hosts." Notice this, a day of vengeance to avenge himself against his adversaries. The sword will devour and be satisfied. It will drink its full of blood, because it will be a sacrifice to the Lord God of hosts. Now, the reason why, again, I'm showing you this because, again, I'm taking the time to show us that if the Church of Jesus Christ is going to be here, uh, I guess my question is, how can the Church of Jesus Christ be here? All right, okay, so let's go to do I want Zephaniah? Zephaniah, and you can see I said that all of these scriptures, the Old Testament talks about judgment. Okay, let's look at judgment and what God is going to do. I'm only giving a snippet here. So let's see. That's not what I'm looking at. I had it before, but all right, let me go to I showed you the day of the Lord, Joel 3, Jeremiah. Okay. All right. Let's look at Zechariah 14. Okay, so then verse 1 says, "A day of the Lord is coming, when your plunder will be divided in your presence. I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. The city will be captured, houses looted, and the women raped." Now, remember 24? It says, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, he says what? Flee, run, right? Notice this, the city will be captured, the houses looted, and the women raped. Half the city will go into exile, and the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. The Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fought in the day of battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives will be split in half from the east and west, forming a huge valley, so that half the mountain will be removed from the south. Watch this. "And you will flee by my mountain valley, for the valley of the mountains will extend to Israel, and you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king. Then the Lord my God will come, and the Holy Ones with him." We'll come back to this. So remember again that he talks about, when he talks about, he told him, when you see the abomination that makes desolation, flee to the mountain of Jerusalem or Judea, flee there. Let's see here. Let's see. I need to look at some more. I saw that one. Where's the one I'm looking at? The day of the Lord coming. All right. Let me try Amos. I mainly want you to see the language that he is referring to, the day of the Lord, which is a day of God's vengeance. All right. This is Amos chapter 5. He says, woe to you, verse 18, I'm sorry. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Now, if I wanted to be funny, I would say those who believe the church is going to go through the tribulation period. Okay. And that would only be a joke. That's all. I do say that because a lot of people, those who believe that the church would be raptured, okay, those who believe that the church will be raptured at the end of the tribulation period, one of their criticism is, well, you pre-tribbers don't want to suffer. You want to try to dodge out before the suffering. Well, that's always kind of funny to me because what do you think we're trying to dodge out? And I will say, yeah, I do want to dodge out. But before I get there, the fact that you're saying that we want to dodge out, okay, that we want to dodge out, and the fact that you keep telling us that we want to dodge out, no, first of all, we just read we're going to suffer, okay? We're going to suffer. But I want you to read this. Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. What will the day of the Lord be for you? So so remember the day of the Lord. This is the time that God is going to now say he's going to do some bad stuff, vengeance, judgment. So as his people, why do you think we need to be there? And that's always my question. There will be people there. There will be saints during the tribulation period. Why do you think the church needs to be there? And there's the reason why they're there, but we can get into that later. But the fact of the church now, like right now, if Jesus came, or before that, if the tribulation period began right now today, and you see all the church, why do you think the church needs to be here during this day right here? Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. What will the day of the Lord be for you? It would be darkness and not light. It would be like a man who flees from a lion only to have a bear confront him. He goes home and rests his hand against the wall only to have a snake bite him. Won't the day of the Lord be darkness rather than light, even gloom without brightness in it? So this is what he's telling them the day of the Lord will be like. Not a good time, not a pleasant time. Let's see, Jeremiah. Which one do I want in Jeremiah? Where you at, Jeremiah? Jeremiah 30. Okay, 30. Let's try that. Is this what I want here? This talks about the Israel being restored. That's not what I was looking for. All right, let's see. I don't know why I'm having a hard time finding my verses here. Let me try one more time in Isaiah 13. Isaiah 13. And that's not probably. All right. Isaiah chapter 13, verse 6, it says, wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, everyone's hands will become weak, and every man's heart will melt. They will be horrified. Pain and agony will seize them. They will be like anguish, like women in labor, and they will look at each other like they will look at each other, their faces flushed with fear. Look, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with rage and burning anger, to make the earth a desolation and to destroy sinners on it. Indeed, the stars of the sky and its constellations will not give us light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shine. I will bring disaster on the world and their own iniquity. On the wicked, I will put an end to the pride of the arrogant and humiliate the insolence of the tyrants. So here's, again, one of the things I wanted to just go over before we go back to Revelation, because again, all of this, what he's saying right here, we're going to study in the book of Revelation. Okay, so all of that, this is what we're going to study in the book of Revelation. When it says that the day of the Lord is going to be God pouring out wrath. The day of the Lord is God judging the wicked. Why does the church have to be there? When you talk about the church going through the tribulation period and then why do we need to be there for God's wrath? And there are people who are adamant on that. No, the day of the Lord, that great tribulation, that 7-year period, is a time in which God will be what? Pouring out wrath on the ungodly, not the godly. Okay? All right, guys, we're going to pick this up in our next study and continue with our in-depth study on the rapture, eschatology with a focus on the rapture, studying Matthew 24 and Revelation side by side. That's why it is important for us, again, just to get all of the scriptures. Anyway, we'll come back to again, I'll circle back around at some point to say why I certainly do not believe the rapture needs to be present during the day of the Lord. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in part 37.